The beast roared again. Not in triumph. In agony. Liora noticed it immediately. Every movement looked painful. Its breathing was uneven. One shoulder bled heavily. Then, she saw it, embedded deep beneath the crystal growth, a gigantic iron spear. Old, rusty, broken. Only the shaft remained visible. Someone had wounded it long ago, and left it to suffer. It's in pain, she whispered. The captain shouted from across the clearing. My lady, stay away. We have to kill it. Liora looked from the soldiers, to the beast, then back again. No. The captain stared. No. We're going to help it. Several guards thought they had misheard. My lady, that's a monster. No. She met the beast's eyes. It's an injured animal. The captain gritted his teeth. If you approach, it will kill you. Maybe. Liora. Pico flew in front of her face. This is exactly how people die. She smiled nervously. You're supposed to be encouraging. I encourage living. Slowly. Very slowly. She stepped forward. The beast growled. Guards raised their weapons. Liora lifted one paw. No one attacks. The clearing became completely still. She continued walking. Each step careful. Measured. Calm. The beast lowered its head. Its breathing thundered through the forest. She could now see the wound clearly. Infected. Swollen. The surrounding fur had fallen away. It must have suffered for weeks. Maybe months. Liora stopped several meters away. She spoke softly. I know. The beast's ears twitched. I know what it's like. Another step. When you're hurting. Everything feels like an enemy. The beast didn't charge. It simply watched her. Its breathing slowed slightly. Pico whispered. I can't believe this is working. I don't think it is. You've never looked more confident. I'm absolutely terrified. Liora reached into her satchel. Every guard tensed. She slowly removed an apple. The beast sniffed the air. She rolled it gently across the ground. It stopped halfway between them. The creature stared at it, then at her. Then, very carefully, it lowered its enormous head, picked up the apple. Crunch. Gone. Liora smiled. I knew it. The captain blinked. Knew what? It isn't hunting. Over the next hour, no one moved. No one spoke loudly. The guards remained ready. The beast remained cautious. Liora slowly gained its trust. Another apple. Then pears. Then fresh vegetables. Finally, she approached close enough to examine the spear. She inhaled slowly. This is going to hurt. The beast closed its eyes. Almost. As though it understood. With help from the strongest guards. They carefully pulled. Nothing. Again. The spear shifted slightly. The beast roared in pain. Several guards nearly fled. Liora kept talking softly. It's okay. It's almost over. One final pull. The broken spear tore free. Dark blood poured from the wound. Immediately, the estate physician rushed forward. Together with Liora, they cleaned the injury. Applied medicinal herbs. Wrapped enormous bandages around the shoulder. The entire process took nearly 3 hours. Not once did the beast attack. As sunset painted the sky gold, the great creature slowly stood. It tested its injured leg. One careful step. Then another. It looked at Liora. For several long seconds. Then, it lowered its massive head. The closest thing such an enormous creature could offer. To a bow. Before quietly disappearing back into the forest. No one spoke. Finally, the captain removed his helmet. I've served 31 years. I've fought monsters. Bandits. Dragons. I've never. He looked at Liora. Seen anyone win a battle. Without fighting. The story spread across the kingdom even faster than the water wheel. Some called her foolish. Others called her blessed. The newspapers printed sketches of the enormous beast bowing before Lady Seraphine. Children began pretending to calm imaginary monsters instead of slaying them. Travelers started calling the northern forest the Lady's Woods. Late that night, Liora stood alone on the manor balcony. The moon shone brightly over healthy fields. Pico floated beside her. You almost got yourself killed. I know. You really scared me. She smiled. I'm sorry. He crossed his tiny arms. Don't do that again. I'll try. Then, without warning, a strange blue screen appeared before Liora's eyes. Unlike anything she had seen since arriving, golden letters slowly formed across it. Hidden quest completed. The guardian of the northern forest has become your ally. Reward unlocked. Dream Bridge. Level 1. The screen faded. Liora frowned. Pico. He looked unusually surprised. That wasn't supposed to unlock yet. What is Dream Bridge? Before he could answer, the world around Liora dissolved into silver mist. The balcony disappeared. The stars vanished. She found herself standing in an endless field of white flowers beneath a twilight sky. And across the field, a graceful black-furred cat in an elegant white dress smiled gently at her. The cat she now resembled. The original Lady Seraphine. At last, they had finally met. White flowers stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted in shades of violet and gold. A gentle breeze rippled through the field like waves across a quiet lake. Liora stood perfectly still. The cat walking toward her moved with quiet grace, every step light, almost as if she weighed nothing at all. She wore an elegant white gown embroidered with silver wheat stalks, and her long black fur shimmered beneath the twilight. She looked exactly like Liora's current body, except her eyes. They held a sadness that no amount of wealth could ever hide. When she smiled, it was warm, but it never reached those eyes. Liora already knew. Seraphine. The noblewoman stopped a few paces away. You've taken wonderful care of my body. Liora's ears lowered. I hope that's okay. Seraphine laughed softly. It belongs to you now. No. Liora gently shook her head. It still belongs to you. For the first time, Seraphine looked surprised. They stood together in silence. Neither seemed to know where to begin. Finally, Seraphine spoke. I watched. You watched. She nodded. Not everything. Only moments. I saw you dismiss them. Liora looked away toward the endless flowers. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I know. They had already chosen to leave. I know. They stopped being your partners long before they packed. I know. Liora looked back at her. Then why are you thanking me? A tiny smile appeared. Because I couldn't say those words. The breeze carried white petals between them. Seraphine watched them drift. I spent years believing. If I became prettier, they'd stay. Petals floated away. If I spent more money, they'd stay. More petals. If I smiled more, they'd stay. She looked toward the distant horizon. When the harvest failed, they stopped speaking to me. They ate separately. They slept separately. They laughed together. Without me. Liora listened quietly. I blamed myself. I didn't know anything about farming. Seraphine continued. My parents handled everything. When they died, they left me land. But not their knowledge. I trusted advisors. They stole from me. I trusted experts. They lied. I trusted my husbands. They gave up. She laughed. A small, broken laugh. And somehow, I convinced myself. It was all my fault. Liora stepped closer. It wasn't. Seraphine looked at her. I should have learned. Yes. I should have asked questions. Yes. I should have paid attention. Yes. Seraphine lowered her head. So it was my fault. Liora gently placed a paw on her shoulder. No. Seraphine blinked. Not learning made mistakes. But mistakes aren't the same as deserving abandonment. The words hung in the air. I failed crops before. Liora continued. I've broken tools. I've planted too early. I've planted too late. I've lost entire harvests. She smiled softly. My parents never looked at me and said, You're not worth helping anymore. Seraphine's eyes filled with tears. I was going to end everything. The words came quietly, almost carried away by the wind. Liora closed her eyes for a moment. I know. Seraphine looked surprised. You do. Pico told me. Silence settled between them again. Seraphine whispered. I thought, if I disappeared, everyone would finally stop being disappointed. Liora gently squeezed her shoulder. I'm disappointed. Seraphine frowned. You are. Yes. You believe the world would be better without you. A tear rolled down Seraphine's cheek. I was wrong. You were. Liora smiled warmly. Your workers still cared. Aldrin still cared. The Academy believes in you now. The kingdom respects you. And she looked around the endless field. I got the chance to meet someone incredibly kind. Seraphine laughed through her tears. I've never been called kind before. You should have been. Chapter 7, The First New Beginning. The morning sun painted the fields in warm shades of gold. Rows of wheat swayed gently in the breeze. Workers laughed as they harvested vegetables larger and healthier than any the estate had produced in decades. Children chased butterflies between orchards that had once been lifeless. Liora stood beside the irrigation reservoir, smiling as water flowed effortlessly through the channels. Every sound reminded her how far they had come. Not because of magic, not because of luck, because hundreds of people had chosen to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. She quietly whispered to herself, We're finally healing. The orange-furred traveler waited patiently until her lesson ended. Only after the students thanked her and left did he approach. He offered a respectful bow. Lady Seraphine. Liora returned the bow. Welcome to Willowcrest Estate. My name is Orion. I've traveled a long way to meet you. His voice was calm, confident, without the polished arrogance common among nobles. Liora noticed something else immediately. His paws. Small scars crossed them. Old calluses covered his palms. The hands of someone who actually worked, not someone who merely gave orders. Pico floated invisibly beside her. Interesting. What? He isn't lying. I didn't think he was. No. I mean, he really did come just to meet you. Liora smiled. What brings you here? Orion looked toward the enormous water wheel. I've spent the last 12 years studying mechanical engineering. You built that. I designed it. He laughed softly. I hope so. I've been trying to understand how it works. She blinked. You traveled across the kingdom because of a water wheel, and the planting frame, and the seed drill, and the irrigation gates. He smiled. I've never met the person behind inventions like these. Liora rubbed the back of her neck. They're not really. She stopped herself. They're just practical. Orion chuckled. The greatest inventions usually are. Over the next several days, Orion remained at the estate. He never demanded special treatment, never expected servants to carry his luggage, never spoke down to workers. Instead, he spent hours asking questions. Why did she choose this gear ratio? Why angle the irrigation channels this way? Why compost in layers instead of piles? Liora answered every question she could. Sometimes, he offered improvements. She listened. They debated ideas, drew sketches together, built small prototypes. When one failed spectacularly and sprayed muddy water across both of them, they simply burst into laughter. Watching from nearby, Aldrin smiled to himself. It's been a long time since I heard her laugh like that. Meanwhile, far away in the capital, the Royal Council held an emergency meeting. Newspapers covered the enormous conference table. Each headline was more unbelievable than the last. Failed estate now feeds 3 counties. Noble lady's inventions spread across the kingdom. Academy rewrites agricultural curriculum. An elderly minister sighed. She's becoming too influential. Another shook his head. She's becoming indispensable. The room fell silent. Then, a messenger burst through the doors. Your Excellencies, we have a problem. What now? The Southern Kingdom has requested copies of Lady Seraphine's inventions. Silence. The minister slowly leaned back. The neighboring kingdoms are paying attention. Back at the academy, Professor Rowan addressed a lecture hall packed with students. He held up one of Liora's notebooks. Many of you enter this academy believing education ends with graduation. He smiled. It doesn't. The greatest scholar in this kingdom currently attends classes beside you. The students exchanged surprised glances. One lion student slowly lowered his head. It was the same one who had mocked Liora on her first day. He whispered quietly, I was wrong. A few days later, Liora visited the academy library. She noticed someone waiting near the entrance. The lion student. He looked nervous. Very nervous. As she approached, he bowed deeply. Lady Seraphine, I owe you an apology. She tilted her head. For what? I laughed at you. I mocked you. I believed asking questions made someone weak. He looked genuinely ashamed. You proved me wrong. Liora smiled warmly. You learned. That's enough for me. He blinked. You're not angry. She laughed. If farmers stayed angry every time someone underestimated them, nothing would ever grow. The student's shoulders relaxed. It felt as though a great weight had been lifted. Weeks passed. 1 invention became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 12. Simple grain dryers. Adjustable plows. Improved beehives. Portable seed storage. None relied on magic. All relied on observation. Soon, artisans from every corner of the kingdom visited the estate. Many expected to find an eccentric noblewoman. Instead, they found Liora sitting beside carpenters, blacksmiths, and farmers, listening more than speaking, learning more than teaching. One old craftsman whispered, Now I understand. It isn't that she knows everything. It's that she's willing to learn from everyone. One afternoon, Pico suddenly appeared on Liora's shoulder. His expression had lost its usual cheerfulness. Liora, what is it? You've triggered another major event. She sighed. I don't suppose this one is good? Not exactly. A blue screen appeared before her eyes. Main story progress updated. Influence rank, rising legend. Danger level increased. Hostile factions activated. The screen vanished. Liora frowned. Hostile factions. Pico nodded. Your inventions are changing the balance of power. So. Some people became rich because farmers stayed poor. The realization hit her immediately. Oh, they're not going to like me. That night, heavy rain fell over the estate. Most workers had already gone home. Only the night watch remained awake. One guard paused. Did you hear that? His partner nodded. On the roof. A shadow moved silently across the manor. Another followed, then another. Dark figures dressed entirely in black landed without making a sound. One whispered, Remember, take the notebooks. If necessary. He drew a slender dagger. Eliminate the lady. Inside the manor, Liora sat alone in her study. She was writing observations from the day's experiments into Seraphine's mother's notebook. The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Everything felt peaceful. Until Pico suddenly froze. His tiny ears shot upward. His wings stopped moving. Liora. She looked up. What? His voice became barely more than a whisper. Don't turn around. She immediately sensed it. Someone else was in the room. Not a servant. Not Aldrin. Not Orion. A slow, almost silent breath came from the darkness behind her. The study door had never opened. The windows remained locked. Yet, she was no longer alone. Rain drummed steadily against the manor windows. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Ink still glistened on the page before Liora. She didn't move. Neither did the figure behind her. Pico hovered just above her shoulder, his tiny face unusually pale. Liora! Don't panic. She took one slow breath. I wasn't planning to. The room fell silent again. Only the rain continued. Liora studied the polished brass teapot sitting on her desk. Its curved surface reflected the room behind her. The image was distorted, but enough. A tall figure dressed entirely in black stood near the bookshelf. A cloth mask covered everything except 2 sharp amber eyes. A short dagger gleamed faintly in one paw. The intruder wasn't rushing. He was waiting, watching, measuring. Professional. Liora spoke without turning around. You've been standing there for almost a minute. The figure didn't answer. If you wanted me dead, I think I'd already be dead. Still silence. So. She dipped her pen back into the ink. Why are you hesitating? The figure's eyes narrowed slightly. Finally, a voice emerged from beneath the mask. You're calmer than expected. Liora smiled faintly. I've had an unusual few months. Suddenly, a crash echoed from downstairs. Then another. The unmistakable sound of steel striking steel. Shouts erupted through the manor. The east hallway. Protect Lady Seraphine. Intruders. Pico gasped. There are more of them. The masked figure in Liora's room cursed under his breath. They've started early. He disappeared through the open window in a blur. Liora jumped to her feet. They're attacking the estate. She reached the hallway, just as Aldrin hurried toward her. My lady! His normally immaculate coat was torn across one sleeve. You must come with me. What happened? We're under attack. The manor had become a battlefield. Guards clashed with masked attackers. Servants hurried frightened children and elderly workers toward the underground wine cellar. Broken glass littered the marble floors. Several fires had already begun where lanterns had fallen. Liora immediately noticed something strange. The attackers ignored jewelry, ignored silver, ignored paintings, ignored treasure. They headed directly toward the library, the workshop, her study. They're after the research. Aldrin nodded grimly. I believe so. Outside, the rain had turned the courtyard into mud. Lightning flashed across the sky. Near the workshop, Orion fought beside the estate guards. He wielded no ornate noble sword. Instead, he carried a heavy blacksmith's hammer. Each swing knocked weapons from attackers' paws. He spotted Liora. What are you doing out here? The notebooks. His expression changed instantly. They're after the inventions. Pico hovered anxiously. Liora, the notebooks aren't your biggest problem. She frowned. What do you mean? He pointed toward the far wall. 3 figures weren't entering the manor. They were climbing over the rear garden wall, toward the experimental fields. Her eyes widened. The seed vault. Every improved seed. Every carefully selected crop. Every year's worth of work. All stored there. If they destroy that. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Liora ran. Orion immediately followed. Wait! She didn't. Mud splashed beneath her boots as they raced across the estate. The rain made visibility poor. Lightning briefly illuminated the fields. 3 dark figures reached the seed vault. One produced a glass bottle filled with thick black liquid. Oil. They intended to burn everything. No! Liora shouted. The nearest attacker turned. The bottle slipped from his paw. It shattered against the stone wall. Oil splashed everywhere. The second attacker struck a flint. A tiny spark flew toward the oil. Time seemed to slow. Liora looked around desperately. Water. She needed water. Then she remembered. The irrigation gate. She sprinted toward the nearby control wheel. Orion instantly understood. Without a word, he ran beside her. Together, they grabbed the heavy wooden wheel. Push! The mechanism resisted. Years ago, it would have required 6 workers. Now, thanks to Liora's improvements, it moved. Slowly, then faster. The gate burst open. A roaring wave of water surged through the main irrigation channel. Seconds later, it overflowed directly into the courtyard surrounding the seed vault. The spark fizzled out before reaching the oil. The attackers stared in disbelief. Their plan had vanished beneath rushing water. The leader growled, "Retreat!" The 3 figures turned and fled toward the forest. Orion started after them. Liora grabbed his arm. Don't! They'll escape. They planned this. They'll plan again. She looked toward the dark trees. And they know the forest better than we do. Reluctantly, he stopped. By dawn, the attack was over. Several guards were injured. Thankfully, none had lost their lives. The manor had suffered damage. Windows broken. Doors splintered. Furniture destroyed. But the notebooks remained safe. The workshop survived. The seed vault stood untouched. Workers immediately began repairs. No one waited for orders. Everyone simply helped. Liora smiled quietly. This estate had become a family. Later that morning, the captain of the guards placed several recovered items on a table. Black clothing, rope, smoke bombs, a strange silver coin. Liora picked it up. One side displayed a serpent wrapped around a stalk of wheat. The other, a crown. She frowned. I've never seen the symbol. Neither had anyone else. Until Orion quietly spoke. I have. Everyone looked at him. His expression had grown serious. Years ago, my father warned me about an organization. What organization? He picked up the coin. They call themselves the Gilded Harvest. The Gilded Harvest? Liora repeated. It sounds like a farming guild. Orion shook his head. Quite the opposite. They're merchants, nobles, corrupt officials. They secretly control grain prices across several kingdoms. Aldrin frowned. They profit during famines. Orion nodded. The less food farmers produce, the richer they become. Silence settled over the room. Liora finally understood. My inventions threatened their entire fortune. Pico floated closer. I was afraid of this. You knew. Not exactly. He looked uncomfortable. The original game never reached this point. What happened? He lowered his tiny ears. Lady Seraphine died before changing anything. The room suddenly felt colder. So, we're writing a completely different future. Pico nodded. One that's never existed. That evening, Liora walked through the fields alone. The rain had finally stopped. Fresh droplets sparkled on the wheat. She gently ran a paw across the ripening grain. It almost burned. A familiar, deep rumble echoed from the edge of the forest. She looked up. The great guardian beast stepped quietly from between the trees. Its injured shoulder had healed remarkably. It approached slowly, then nudged her gently with its enormous head. Liora laughed. I suppose you're saying hello. The beast looked toward the distant hills. Its ears suddenly stood upright. It growled. Not at her. Beyond her. Toward the mountains. Liora followed its gaze. At first, she saw nothing. Then, tiny flashes of red light flickered across the distant peaks. One, then 5, then dozens. Like campfires, or signal beacons. The guardian beast growled again. Louder this time. Pico appeared beside Liora. His tiny face had turned completely white. No, he whispered. They've awakened an army. The red lights burned across the mountains like scattered stars. 1, then 10, then hundreds. The guardian beast stood perfectly still, its golden eyes fixed on the distant peaks. Its thick fur rose along its back. Animals across the valley reacted before the people did. Birds abandoned their nests. Deer raced toward the southern forests. Even insects seemed to vanish into the earth. Nature was warning them. Something was coming. Liora felt a chill. How long? Pico swallowed. If those are what I think they are. 3 weeks. 3 weeks until what? He looked toward the mountains. An army. The next morning, messengers rode in every direction. The manor's meeting hall filled with people who, just months earlier, would never have sat at the same table. Farmers, village elders, blacksmiths, academy professors, engineers, merchants, local nobles, even former rivals. Liora stood before a large map spread across the table. No throne, no raised platform. She stood beside everyone else. We don't have enough soldiers. A village captain nodded. We know. We don't have enough walls. We know. We don't have enough time. Silence. Then Liora smiled. So we'll stop trying to solve the wrong problem. Everyone looked at her. She pointed to the map. What does an army need? A young rabbit answered. Soldiers. She shook her head. No. Food. The room became quiet. They need wagons. They need grain. They need clean water. They need horses. They need bridges. They need roads. She looked around the room. If we protect those, their army slows. Professor Rowan smiled proudly. Logistics. She nodded. They can have 10,000 soldiers. If they can't eat, they can't fight. For the next 2 weeks, the entire region transformed. Not into a fortress, into a machine. Every village contributed. Blacksmiths repaired tools instead of weapons. Carpenters built wagons. Millers worked day and night. Farmers harvested early. Engineers expanded irrigation channels into emergency reservoirs. The Royal Agricultural Academy suspended normal classes. Every student volunteered. No one waited to be asked. Liora worked harder than anyone. She slept only a few hours each night. She checked grain storage, designed temporary bridges, mapped supply routes, organized work crews. Whenever someone suggested she rest, she smiled. I'll sleep after the harvest. Orion watched her one evening as she repaired a broken grain sifter herself. You know. She looked up. What? You've inspired thousands. She laughed. I've mostly just given people more work. No. He smiled warmly. You reminded them that they matter. Days later, the first refugees arrived. Families from villages near the mountains. Children, grandparents, farmers who had lost everything. Without hesitation, Liora opened the estate. Every empty guest room became a shelter. Every barn became temporary housing. The kitchens cooked around the clock. Some nobles criticized her. You'll exhaust your supplies. She answered calmly. If food isn't shared, what exactly are we growing it for? 3 days before the army arrived, a familiar carriage entered the estate. 5 familiar figures stepped down. Rowan, Cedric, Victor, Galen, Elias, the 5 former husbands. None wore expensive clothing anymore. None carried servants. They approached slowly, almost nervously. Liora met them in the courtyard. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet curiosity. Rowan bowed deeply. We came to apologize. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Cedric stepped forward. We were cowards. Victor lowered his head. When things became difficult, we looked for someone to blame. Elias quietly added, we should have stayed. Galen looked directly at Liora. We should have learned. Silence followed. Then Rowan spoke again. We don't expect forgiveness. We only ask to help defend the people we abandoned. Liora studied each of them carefully. Months ago, she would have dismissed them immediately. Now, she saw something different. Regret. Real regret. Not because she had become successful. Because they had become better. She smiled gently. The workers are repairing irrigation channels. They could use 5 more pairs of paws. The 5 stared. That's all. She nodded. The estate doesn't need more husbands. It needs more helpers. For the first time in many months, all 5 smiled. Not because they had been accepted back, but because they had been given the chance to become better people. That evening, the horizon darkened. Dust rose like a storm. The enemy had arrived. Thousands marched beneath black banners, embroidered with golden wheat. The symbol of the gilded harvest. Behind them rolled massive supply wagons, grain carts, siege engines, everything needed for a long campaign. Their leader rode at the front, an elderly noble wrapped in black robes. The very same man who had ordered Liora investigated months earlier. He looked across the flourishing valley. His expression hardened. So, she truly changed everything. He raised one paw. The army stopped. Then, to everyone's surprise, he didn't order an attack. Instead, he smiled. A cruel smile. Burn the fields. Liora watched from a nearby hill. Her heart skipped. They're not attacking the manor. Pico nodded grimly. They're attacking hope. Hundreds of soldiers, carrying torches, broke away from the main force. They spread across the valley, heading for farms, orchards, granaries, Everything the people had worked so hard to rebuild. Liora closed her eyes for one brief moment, then opened them. Signal everyone. What signal? The harvest. Moments later, church bells rang across the valley. Signal fires lit hilltops. Flags rose from watchtowers. Farmers who had rehearsed for weeks immediately sprang into action. Wagons rolled into the fields. Workers harvested grain at incredible speed. Children carried baskets. Students operated the new seed drills and threshers. The water wheel powered emergency pumps, flooding firebreak trenches. Orion's improved grain elevators loaded wagons in minutes instead of hours. The former husbands worked shoulder to shoulder with everyone else. No one asked who was noble, who was poor, who had made mistakes. Everyone simply worked. When the enemy reached the first field, it was already empty. The second, harvested. The third, flooded. The fourth, surrounded by irrigation channels too wide for fire to cross. The commander frowned. They're impossible. No. The elderly noble interrupted. They're prepared. The guardian beast emerged from the northern forest. Not charging. Walking. Behind it, wolves, great elk, wild boars, even enormous bears. The forest itself seemed to have answered Liora's kindness. The enemy horses panicked. Supply wagons overturned. Lines broke. Chaos spread. Watching from the hilltop, Liora whispered, "Thank you." The guardian beast looked back at her, then let out a mighty roar that echoed across the valley. Not one of rage, one of defiance. As the sun began to set, the valley still stood. The harvest had been saved. The people stood together. The enemy's first assault had failed. But the elderly noble simply laughed. Slow, confident, he raised an ancient crystal from beneath his robes. Dark energy swirled inside it. Pico's tiny face lost all color. "Liora, that's impossible." "What is it?" His voice trembled. "That's not part of this world's rules." The noble crushed the crystal in his paw. The earth shook violently. Mountains cracked. The sky itself darkened. And from the enormous chasm opening beyond the battlefield, something far older than the guardian beast began to rise. The ground shook so violently that everyone lost their footing. Wagons tipped. Trees swayed. The irrigation canals rippled as though the water itself had become frightened. Across the valley, farmers clung to one another while children were hurried toward safety. A deep crack split the mountains. Then another. Then another. The earth opened. From the darkness beneath the world, a colossal creature began to rise. It wasn't covered in fur or scales. Its body resembled ancient stone woven together with glowing crystal roots. Vines wrapped around its limbs, and entire trees clung to its shoulders as though they had grown there over centuries. Its eyes slowly opened. They glowed a brilliant emerald. Not with anger, with exhaustion. The valley became silent. Even the guardian beast lowered its head. Pico whispered, "The world warden." Liora stared upward. "What is that?" Pico swallowed. "It's older than kingdoms. Older than the game. It exists to protect the balance of the land." She frowned. "Then why is it attacking?" "It isn't." The creature hadn't taken a single aggressive step. It simply looked around, as though awakening from an impossibly long sleep. The elderly noble laughed triumphantly. "You see, you've awakened exactly as planned." He raised both paws toward the giant. "Destroy everything she built." The world warden didn't move. The noble's smile faded. "I command you." Still, nothing. The emerald eyes slowly turned toward Liora. Thousands of people held their breath. She felt no hatred, no rage, only curiosity. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the enormous being spoke. Its voice sounded like wind passing through ancient forests. "Child, why does this land sing again?" Liora blinked. The entire valley turned to look at her. She took a cautious step forward. I don't know." The giant watched her. "You restored rivers. You healed soil. You returned life. You listened." Another long silence. "You are not the one I came to judge." The elderly noble's face drained of color. "What?" The world warden slowly looked at him. Its eyes darkened. "You poisoned rivers. You buried fertile land beneath greed. You turned harvest into profit, instead of life." The noble backed away. "I preserved order. You preserved fear." He screamed with rage. "If you won't obey, I'll destroy her myself." Dark magic erupted around him. Black vines lashed toward Liora. Before anyone could react, a massive stone hand descended. The world warden caught the attack effortlessly. The dark vines crumbled into dust. The giant looked almost disappointed. So much potential. Wasted. The members of the Gilded Harvest panicked. "Retreat! Run!" But there was nowhere to go. The guardian beast stepped from the forest. Behind it came hundreds of animals, not attacking, simply blocking every escape. The world warden raised one enormous hand. The stolen wealth carried by the Gilded Harvest, coins, jewels, contracts, forged deeds, lifted into the air as if pulled by an invisible force. The papers dissolved into golden light. The gold itself scattered across the valley like seeds. The giant spoke. "What was taken from the people returns to the people." The farmers watched in stunned silence as bags of grain, tools, livestock, and supplies appeared across the villages, restored as if years of theft had never happened. The elderly noble collapsed to his knees. "It's impossible." The world warden looked down at him. "The harvest remembers." With a single motion, vines rose from the earth and gently, but firmly, bound the noble and his closest conspirators. No violence, no spectacle, Only justice. Royal guards, who had finally arrived from the capital, stepped forward to take them into custody. The battle ended without another sword being raised. As sunset bathed the valley in amber light, cheers erupted. Workers embraced. Children laughed. The academy's students cried openly. Professor Rowan removed his spectacles, just to wipe his eyes. Aldrin looked toward the sky and whispered, "Your parents would be proud." Liora smiled. She wished they could have seen it. That night, a familiar blue screen appeared. Main quest complete. The lady of the failing estate has changed her destiny. Hope restored. Balance restored. Return to your world? Yes. Liora stared at the glowing words. Her heart suddenly felt heavy. She looked around the estate. The workers. The students. The guardian beast sleeping peacefully beyond the forest. The world warden, slowly returning beneath the mountains. Then, her eyes found Orion. He had been quietly watching her from across the courtyard, as though he somehow knew. Later that evening, they walked together through the fields. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Orion smiled. "You've been looking at the stars differently." Liora looked at him. "What do you mean?" "As if you're saying goodbye." She stopped walking. "Would you believe me if I told you I'm not really from this world?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "I don't think the question matters." She blinked. "It doesn't." "No." He looked across the wheat. "The woman who stood beside me, laughed with me, worked beside me, helped strangers, that's real. Where you came from doesn't change that." Liora felt tears welling in her eyes. "I don't want to leave." "I know." Before she could say anything else, 7 familiar figures approached. Over the past year, they had become her closest companions. Orion, the engineer. Cashin, the gentle physician who had helped save the guardian beast. Finn, the cheerful orchard keeper who could coax fruit from nearly any tree. Silas, the quiet carpenter whose ingenious designs improved every invention. Kale, the former royal knight who had resigned rather than obey corrupt orders. Lucian, the beekeeper and botanist whose flowers had restored the valley's pollinators. And Asher, the academy researcher whose curiosity matched her own. None of them had ever been married. None had sought her title or wealth. They had fallen in love with her slowly, through shared work, long conversations, and countless ordinary days. Orion stepped forward first. "We wanted to ask you something." She smiled. "I'm listening." He glanced at the others, who all nodded. "Wherever life takes us, would you allow us to walk beside you?" Liora laughed softly through her tears. "In another life, I would have loved that." The 7 looked at her with confusion. She wished she could explain. Instead, she embraced each of them, one by one, holding on just a little longer than she normally would. That night, she dreamed once more of the endless white flower field. Seraphine waited there, brighter than before. "You did it." Liora smiled. "We did it." Seraphine laughed. "I think it's time I stayed. And it's time you went home." Liora nodded. "Take care of them." "I will." "And you." Seraphine gently touched Leora's forehead. "Live the life your parents hoped for." The dream dissolved into light. Liora opened her eyes. She gasped. The familiar wooden ceiling. The tiny farmhouse. The smell of earth after rain. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. She sat upright. Her body felt real. Warm. Alive. She hurried to the mirror. It was her. Her own body. Her own long black fur. Her own little farmhouse. She was home. Outside, the chickens clucked impatiently. The windmill creaked. Everything looked exactly as she remembered. Had it all been a dream? Then she noticed it. On her bedside table rested Seraphine's mother's notebook. She slowly opened it. Every page remained. Every sketch. Every farming method. Every observation. It had crossed worlds with her. Pico suddenly floated up from behind the notebook. "Morning." Liora laughed in disbelief. "You came too." He folded his tiny paws proudly. "I told you. I was your guide. I never said I was staying behind." The months that followed transformed her farm. She introduced crop rotation, layered composting, improved irrigation, mechanical water pumps adapted to her own world's tools, windbreaks, seed selection, natural pest management, rainwater harvesting, simple grain storage improvements. Neighbors were skeptical at first, then curious, then amazed. The once struggling farm flourished. Not just hers. She freely taught every farmer willing to learn. Soon, nearby communities were harvesting more food than ever before. When people asked how she had learned so much, she would simply smile and say, "I had some very good teachers." Years later, as the sun set over fields more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible, Liora stood beneath the old oak tree where her parents rested. She placed a basket of the season's first harvest beside their graves. "We did it." The wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere nearby, Pico was trying, and failing, to convince a chicken that it could learn to fly. Liora laughed. She looked across the thriving farm, alive once more with birdsong, healthy crops and hope. She understood something at last. The greatest harvest had never been wheat, or fruit, or gold. It had been people. Because when knowledge is shared, when kindness is chosen, when courage is planted, hope always grows. And no matter which world you call home, a single seed can change everything. The end.